In June of 1979, a man approached the owner of the Elberton Granite Finishing Company. He told the owner, Joe Findley, that his name was Robert C. Christian. He wanted to know if Findley could build a monument for him. He even brought along a scale model of what he wanted Findley to make. The monument needed to be 16 feet tall, made up of 4 separate slabs. The slabs were to be arranged in such a way that they would track the progress of the moon's cycle every year. It needed a slot that aligned with the summer and winter solstices, as well as showing the noon sun at the equinoxes. A viewing hole would be pointed at the North Star, and finally, it was constructed in such a way that it would always show the day of the year, like some bizarre megalithic calendar. At first, Findley thought it was a joke, but when that model was rolled out, he realized that Christian, or whoever he really was totally serious. But R.C. Christian wasn't done just yet. A message was to be engraved on the stones, repeated in the 8 most spoken languages in the world: Russian, English, Spanish, Swahili, Arabic, Hindi, Hebrew, and Chinese, as well as 4 languages that were long dead: Sanskrit, Classical Greek, Babylonian, and Egyptian hieroglyphics. Christian wanted this monument to be indestructible, capable of standing strong for millennia, and even surviving an atomic bomb. He and whoever was helping to fund the project wanted it to serve as a guide to humanity in the event of a calamity or a global catastrophe. Findley only needed to take one look at the scale model to know that the calculations to make the precise astronomy math work out was exact. Findley worked with granite. He did this kind of thing every day, and he knew perfectly well just how much pinpoint accuracy mattered when making any statue or marker of granite. But this was larger than anything he'd ever been contracted to make before. Findley knew he could do it, but it would be expensive, and he didn't hesitate to tell Christian that, hoping to discourage the madman from going through with the project. R.C. Christian simply said that the price didn't matter and that he and his like-minded associates would take care of the financial side of things. But Findley was still unconvinced that Christian even had the money. He insisted that an account for the funds be set up and that he'd start work as soon as a hefty deposit was laid down. Christian was perfectly agreeable to these terms, so he went to the Granite City Bank and drew up an account with the help of the bank president, Wyatt Martin. But there was a little snag. Martin couldn't legally set up the account using a fake name. R.C. Christian was hesitant, but with no other option, he agreed. He instructed Wyatt that under no circumstances was he to reveal his identity to anyone, not even Findley. Wyatt kept his word. For the next 35 years, the identity of R.C. Christian remained a secret, no matter how many times he was asked about it. Christian put down the deposit as promised, and he made sure that the funds kept coming in as needed. After taking inflation into account, that comes up to around $400,000 today. Before R.C. Christian left town, he bought a 5-acre plot of land in Albert County, Georgia, where Findley was supposed to erect the monument. Now, if you were wondering what R.C. Christian's real name was and what that inscription actually said, don't worry. We'll get to that in just a second. Finally, after almost a year of construction, the Georgia Guidestones were erected on March 22, 1980. Whether or not Christian chose that date deliberately isn't known, but given how meticulously well planned out the monument and all the details on it was, well, it was probably intentional, because the unveiling happened on the vernal equinox, when the sun is exactly above the equator and the day and night is of equal length. The name Georgia Guidestones wasn't coined by Christian himself, it just sort of organically came into existence because it was located in Georgia, and the message inscribed on it was something of a guide, a new set of 10 commandments, if you will. These commandments seem pretty benign, even well-meaning at first, telling people not to be a cancer on the earth, to keep the population under 500 million so that we can always remain in balance with nature, to protect people with fair laws and just courts. But it gets a little more ominous when it starts mentioning that we should guide reproduction, selecting only the fittest to reproduce, to balance personal rights with social duties, and to unite the world with one living language and one singular court system. To the more astute readers, this was starting to sound a lot more like a social credit system, the policing of the entire world under one roof, a New World Order. The backlash after the unveiling shouldn't have been all that surprising. On the one hand, you have the argument that the Guidestones are meant to be used as a guidestone in the event of a global cataclysm, to do things more responsibly if we ever got the opportunity to start fresh. And, on the other side, the argument was that it was the working model that the proponents of the New World Order were going by, and that they'd achieve these commandments by any means necessary. Now, this last one isn't as outrageous as you'd think. The concept of eugenics and controlling the population didn't die with the Nazis, and the champions of culling the world's population aren't exactly secretive about it either. Club of Rome, Morgenthau Group, the Rockefeller family, Skull and Bone Society, Bill Gates, and even the founder of Planned Parenthood championed eugenics. This isn't just a handful of radicals. We're talking about thousands of prominent figures who openly state that 90% of the Earth's population should be eradicated in a single generation, that religion, culture, and traditions are inferior to a global ruling system that puts everyone and everything under a single lens, with no room for anything outside logic, science, and the value based solely on what a person is graded by, according to the terms decided upon by a singular global ruling body. And R.C. Christian confirmed all of this in his 1996 book, Common Sense Removed, that he sent copies of to the United States Senate and in response to the public's questions. He made it pretty clear that the birth of every child must be arranged, monitored, and that keeping the population under control should take precedent even over national security. That we should use our current knowledge to craft a new, superior race above the inferior, overpopulating, and destructive billions that we have roaming the earth today. And those that refuse to comply, why, Christian proposes that they be punished by the full might of the law. In short, R.C. Christian and his Guidestones mirror the New World Order, or for the more religious critics, exactly what the Book of Revelations warns us about, a single ruling language and governing body like in the times of Babylon. All that said, who exactly was R.C. Christian, and was he only one man with some crazy ideas and too much money on his hands, or was he backed by someone, or many someones? Well, that bank president, Wyatt Martin, and R.C. Christian kept in touch throughout the years. In interviews, Martin dropped enough hints for us to make a few assumptions. Over the decades, he stated that Christian had at least one daughter, that he was from the Midwest, and that he did his basic training in Georgia before being deployed in World War II. We also found out that Christian died after the year 2000. But the final clue to the puzzle came in a 2005 documentary. This documentary was an appalling abuse of Martin's declining mental state. He'd suffered a recent stroke, and it's almost certain that after all of his years of silence, that he was taken advantage of in his declining years. Nevertheless, the documentary commenced and Martin slipped up once more, but this time his mistake was earth-shattering. He'd kept all of Christian's letters and he showed it to the film crew, and a sly cameraman just so happened to catch the address on one of the letters. Just hours after the documentary's release, the internet did what it does best. They tracked down that address. It led to a man by the name of Herbert Kirsten, a surgeon from Fort Dodge, Iowa. The information that Martin let slip matched up perfectly to Kirsten, and it's almost certain that he was the man who commissioned the construction of the Georgia Guidestones. And when you look at who he was connected with, well, he befriended some pretty sketchy and radical individuals. William Sales Doane, an author and Fort Dodge historian, claimed that Kirsten was a white supremacist who believed that Northern European whites were superior to any other race. In a letter supposedly written by Kirsten, he openly supports David Duke, the former Grand Wizard of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. It's certain that he was close friends with William Shockley, a physicist, who not only claimed that non-white people were inferior, but he also proposed that anyone who had an IQ below 100 had to be forcefully sterilized. The aforementioned documentary also came up with a Rosicrucian document uncovered in Coggins Industries. This document hints at a time capsule that's buried beneath the Guidestones. This Rosicrucian connection to the document opened a whole can of worms when people looked into more leads that leaned toward the Guidestones being a Freemason passion project. Its connections to Freemasonry and their offshoot branch, the Rosicrucians, are well documented, but they are more insubstantial. The stellar alignment with equinoxes and solar constellations are a well-known style when it comes to the Masons' way of constructing their temples and choosing the placement of their buildings. The use of ancient languages and even the blue granite used for the Guidestones are all typical Masonic symbolisms. The pseudonym that Kirsten used is indicative of his ties. Rosicrucian sure sounds a lot like Christian. The RC is thought to be an abbreviation of the Knights of the Rose Croix, the 18th degree in Freemasonry. The numbers 3, 7, and 33 come up a lot when the math is applied to the configuration of the stones, and all of these numbers are extremely significant to the Freemasons. But honestly, besides the document found by the documentary, the other connections to the Freemasons are circumstantial. Though there's a hell of a lot of coincidences when you pile them all together, and that's reason enough to be suspicious. Since its construction, the Guidestones has had its fair share of vandalism, so CCTV cameras were put up to deter any more graffiti artists and wannabe occultists with Ouija boards. Those cameras caught an individual on July 6, 2022 at 4 in the morning. Seconds after the culprit is seen running away, a massive explosion took out one of the slabs and severely damaged the rest of the structure. If you were hoping to find out who the bomber was, well, you're out of luck. Within hours, the scene was taped off, and every last slab of the Guidestones was removed from the scene. No investigation, no mention of what kind of explosives were used, and no identification of the car that the CCTV caught. The site to the Guidestones only has one road leading in and out, so are we to believe that in the middle of nowhere they couldn't track that car driving past the nearest town? Or that in a country like the USA, that is under constant terrorist threat, that they couldn't identify where the materials for that explosive came from? Nope, that place was scrubbed clean faster than a senator's exit from a brothel, and no one's even bothered to give a reason why. There were some talks about rebuilding the monument, but that hasn't come to fruition, and just like the investigation, the line of discussion just went cold almost as soon as it started, and since then, every mention of rebuilding it or what became of the investigation has been ignored. There are several takeaways that we need to focus on. For one, a project of this size, exact specifications, and the hefty price tag on it wasn't some crackpot idea from a guy with a little too much time on his hands. It's clear that Kirsten had more people behind him who believed in the Guidestones besides just himself. The commandments definitely read like the laws of some totalitarian government ideal that's thinly veiled as an environmental cry to stop climate change. Protecting nature has nothing to do with it, as it's all about control, subjugation, and creating a police state. And finally, the assault on the stones was handled very, very oddly. The only thing the authorities were concerned about is how quickly they could remove all traces of it. Why is that? Unless the vandal knew something we don't, or they were afraid that an investigation would unearth even more damning evidence, so they decided that it was best left alone, hoping that time would allow the curiosity to die down. One thing is certain, the Georgia Guidestones had a purpose, and that set of beliefs was connected to enough wealthy and dangerous people to give us a reason to worry about its implications.